Hello guys, Age 2, two-player tier list. You know, Vlada called me and complained that I didn't put anyone in S tier so far. It's very underused. And Eleanor, yeah, maybe a bit questionable, but I stand by my decision. She's S tier. But okay, I said you're right. It was a bit underused. Let's change it. Let's look at Age 2, two-player. And here we go. Johannes Sebastian Bach, S tier. Um, yeah, the entire two-player meta has shaped around the idea that you have very strong H2 leaders who can create a lot of culture, and the military counterplay is often not a good bet because in a lot of cases one war isn't enough. And the better bet is to to try to build culture more efficiently than your opponent. Yeah, and Bach is in a game where it even isn't an open-ended culture fest, where it is a bit tight with military. He creates two culture on his own. He turns one religion into an opera, and all of a sudden, it is this game state where, the rest of his stuff can go into military. If there's Marlene Dietrich in H3, you have the perfect transition into H3. And yeah, often enough, one war isn't enough. Or Bach has just done this so efficiently that he's not even necessarily losing that war. And that is more or less the two-player meta, and that's why, all those culture leaders are extremely strong. And Bach is, one of those and one of the best of those. Let's see if he's the best. That might be close, because he has maybe is a bit more versatile in the sense that he's not only good in those culture fests, he's already good in more or less every game state. Catherine, not good enough. I would even say C tier, maybe B tier, but I would even go as far as saying C tier. Stealing that yellow cube costs a political action, and if you are stronger and if you have worked for being stronger and you have some strength events in there, that costs some momentum. And often it's not that big of a deal. And then two culture and a red cube on its own doesn't sound too bad. I mean, honestly, maybe she's B tier, but the problem is that she just loses against those leaders. If you take her, you just lose every time against Bach, Shakespeare, or Darwin. And then there's I don't know what matchups she wins actually. I play her sometimes because it's still the best choice maybe sometimes, but it always feels underwhelming. So let's keep her in C tier. It's again one of those instances where I just look at this and think, hey, that's not that bad compared to this. Hey, it's not so much worse, right? And then my experience tells me very underwhelming. Very few success with her. Of course, if the deck isn't that great, if you don't have those leaders in all those Culture Fest leaders, and then you play a normal game, and you had a good H1 leader that you played for a long time, like a Saladin or Eleanor, and then you play her into H3 with a Republic where you didn't have a third military action, and she has her place. Yeah, her her ability is underwhelming. I would say that's more or less even a trap to use it. It has to have some very specific outcome to annoy the opponent with some populating or happy face issues that you create with it. Otherwise, it's a big cost to skip a political action. It's just a big cost. James Cook, B tier. Even in those games where you do have a lot of colonies, and he creates and he produces 4 or 5 culture per turn, he loses to these guys. Because the difference is, these guys, he has to rebuild military units for those colonies, and it's sometimes hard to do all that and still build operas and journalisms. And these guys build operas and journalisms while producing the same amount of culture. So in those games where you have a lot of colonies, he can compete with them, but that is a huge condition in the first place. And he runs out of steam because, when they leave civilizations, they will have produced, they will have a civilization where they still produce culture, and this guy often has a civilization where he hasn't focused on that. So on top of that, with the fact that you need 3, 4, 5 colonies in the first place to compete with them, overall B tier. Yeah, sure. In those games where he does his thing, he's not bad. But even in those games, I don't think he's that great either. Darwin, S tier. Maybe one thing I want to reiterate, I didn't point it out that specifically. He almost doesn't give you any economical value. Yeah, of course, there might be the one or the other territory that you win because of his extra cards that you can bid. But that's a niche, or that's actually an edge case, I think. And other than that, he just produces culture. Both of those produce some sort of economy. He changes, in the best case, religions to operas. Sometimes you can get away with also getting philosophies. Yeah, philosophies is good. Alchemy is maybe sometimes a bit greedy. One problem with Bach is that it can happen that you are so focused on going all in on culture that you do run out of science at some point. You do move that alchemy over, and you are on +2 science, and then you might miss out on science for maybe an air force. And then if your opponent high rolls on impacts, then he's not very well prepared for impacts with his civilization. So there's a cost, but still, generally he has some economical value on top of his culture engine. And Darwin also. There's a lot of setups where you just build 2 philosophies and then maybe a journalism, then it's already 3 culture per turn, another journalism, or printing press, obviously it's 4 culture per turn, which is extremely good. And on top of that, he just takes those techs cheaper, which is really good economical value. More or less a civil action per turn, sometimes more, sometimes not, but on average maybe the more you civil actions you already have, like with a good republic or common or even monarchy and code of laws, something, if you already have 6, then maybe it's more than 1 civil action per turn. And that's huge. That's super huge. And that's why I also put him in S tier and Cook is here. B tier. Yeah, I would say B tier. Gaudi. For me, he's a bit worse than those guys. Yeah, basically, I also think he loses most of the times compared to these, but he can produce his. That's maybe the issue. His culture income is a bit capped. It's most cases 4 max, very rarely 5. And then that's the thing, you don't want to spread your text so thin. You don't really want to have 5 different urban building texts that you use. It's like not very optimal. And then he produces in most cases reasonably 3 culture per turn. And in a lot of game states, that's actually super good. If you don't play against Bach, Shakespeare, and maybe against Darwin, it's somewhat playable. Darwin is maybe I should be a separated tier here, but I would still put him in S. But maybe it's like better to think about him here, and then there's Bach and Shakespeare. And Gaudi is, yes, he could also be reasonably done here, but I would think, since his culture engine is capped, and in a lot of games, that economical value that he has, developing the urban buildings for less science, it's not that important, maybe. I missed that on Bach, by the way. He does that also. Yeah, he develops the opera cheaper. And here, the science, it is not bad, especially in Twitch 3. If it was very tight until Age 2, both players don't have their culture engines yet, and then he develops that multimedia for 6 science instead of 9, or that movie for 7 science instead of 10, something like that. Then it shines. Yeah, it sometimes does something, but science is an interesting resource in 2-player because abundant science doesn't scale as well as in 3-player, 4-player. In 3-player, 4-player, just because there's more players, it's more likely that more impacts get played, right? And then this science, everything you develop somehow better scales with those impacts. And in 2-player, it's like you need a certain threshold of science for the things that you need to get out. And the extra science only is really valuable if you yourself draw those impacts. Or your opponent already has a setup for playing such impacts and scaling with science. Then you yourself also get that value. So a lot less cases overall. And I don't know. In the end, it's also a bit my impression that if they were next to each other, like Bach and Gaudi, there are very, 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 or Shakespeare and Gaudi, there are very, very, very few situations where I think, Gaudi, he helps me to get this building out now. And yeah, doesn't scale that well. Also, his entire setup doesn't scale that well with those huge H3 wonders. That's also maybe part of the discussion that I have to mention here. These guys all scale with Hollywood, internet. Yeah, that's the Hollywood and internet. That's the 2 huge wonders very well. And he only scales with the internet well. Yeah, okay. Admittedly, he only half of his setup scales with the Hollywood well, but that's already good enough. If you have like 2 journalisms and then you build 2, 3 operas, then it's also already a huge H3 wonder. Yeah, overall, he's at A. He's not as strong as the other guys, not as meta-defining. It's more like in a reasonable place, I would say, for 2-player. Maria Teresa, also A tier. She is maybe one of those leaders that can threaten a strong enough military. She somehow, pair her with an ocean liner, that's already absurd. Then it's 1 science, 1 culture per turn, and a rock per turn for military. And then you can, with some more ingredients like abundant military actions, you can threaten that H3 war. And she does that, interestingly, better than, let's go to Napoleon, who I would say is B tier, but top of B tier. I think he's better than Cook. Between the two, she's the more dangerous leader because she gives infrastructure, she gives economy. And Napoleon needs to have maybe an H2 war already, most cases, and to help win that war, thanks to his bonus, and then he does something. Sometimes, in some games, yeah, he can also just defend the lead. If you've already been super greedy into H2 and the opponent is already setting up to try to punish you, then sometimes it's even better to take the Napoleon instead of the Shakespeare next to each other, because he has already shown that he abandoned all hope of beating you civilly, and then you just take Napoleon and defend. He has his place. But between the two, she's the more dangerous one to kill in H3. That guy dies at some point in H3. And until then, he has done no economy. You have to still draw your H3 war. It happens some place in the future. If you could consistently draw an H3 war very early on, then maybe it would be okay. But playing him into H3 all the time with only this 4 to 6 strength and a red cube is just horrible. So, yeah, she can realistically threaten to build up a military that is strong enough. She can, make you ignore some science income buildings, because this science per turn or per population is then exactly somehow enough to have enough science for those air forces and the military techs. So, yeah, she's very strong. Maybe I would even put her above Gaudi here. She really has a good spot in the overall game. I think in a 3-player, 4-player, I would say she's maybe even the best leader, H2. And here she has her good spot, I would say. Robespierre, yeah, that's an interesting one. I would also say A tier, just because Republic is so good. Robespierre Revolution, in a nice timing, it can even compete to those leaders in some sense. If he helps you to first turn H2, get the Republic out, while you are somehow starving on science, his impact cannot be understated. So, yeah, that's that. He's strong. He's not S tier, he's strong. He has a very good spot. I like to use him. Even if the roster is like this, I sometimes find myself just using it for that revolution. And then he has some other spots he's good in, right? You just take him at the end of H2 and still can hope for an H3 revolution, which has its cost because H3 draws are very important, but it's still, if you somehow got blocked on governments and then there's the communism, can realistically save a game. Newton. Yeah, I get flashbacks to the old version. There you had Napoleon here, and then there was Newton, who was like playable. And here, yeah, I would say probably top of B tier. He gives you those civil actions. Yeah, probably I already mentioned why he's not better than this. It's because abundant science is just not that important. Of course, you will have some games where it just works, where he will create a ton of value, but more often than not, I don't know. You need to have some ingredients. If you put him on top of an alchemy, he's only 1 science per turn. If you pair him with a journalism, it's good, I think. Yeah, you had 2 philosophies, build a journalism, that would be 4, and then you play Newton, then it's 6 science, enough for everything, and he gives you those some civil actions, then it's decent. But I would say in those cases he still loses most of the time to just Bach or Shakespeare. So what's the point, really? Yeah. Nobel is underwhelming in 2-player, I would say. Yeah, in some games. You go into H2, he's very early. Somehow H1 was a little awkward, some military build up. Can happen. And then his ceiling is very high. And those two, from 2 income to 4 income and the 2 strength, they do a lot. And then, yeah. In 3-player, 4-player, he has this setup for the Nobel Prizes. And then he has more cases where he also generates some value on top of this science. And you can aim to have a very good economy and very good science economy and a lot of civil actions, and then cash out on the Nobel Prizes. Small shout out to the 2-on-2 mode. We used it in one game, and then both of us managed to have a very good infrastructure for science, and both of us managed to get a Nobel Prize out. I think he's in 2-on-2 he might be like super S tier for that reason. But yeah, I'm not very keen on playing him in a lot of cases, and actually the cost of an extra civil action into H3 is a lot. It's very high, paying an extra civil action to replace this leader. And then even if he's next to even James Watt, who will only give me 2 culture maybe, or 4 or something, I prefer over Nobel in some cases where it's already late in H2. Yeah, he has some space, also some use cases, but overall I would say pretty weak in 2-player. James Watt, yes, too situational. That might be the leader with the biggest change between 3-player, 4-player, and 2-player. In 2-player, you are guaranteed to get iron, and in most cases, you will get it. And then he has no space. He has no use cases. In those rare cases where it aligns, where you get an early coal, and then there's James Watt next to it, then take him. Then his ceiling is super good. Then he does a lot. Then there's some rare cases where that happens late in H2, and you have a railroad, and until then you had already a good leader, H1 leader all the time. And you take it for the coal, but you get an oil. Ooh, that's fun. Or mechanized agriculture, but it's too niche in 2-player. You can't. His floor is 0 and his ceiling is pretty okay, I would say, and that makes him D tier. Shakespeare, yeah, and then maybe you can ask yourself which one of those 2 is better. The thing is, Shakespeare always wins against Bach in a vacuum, because Shakespeare, you have to read this 3 signs discount for the opera, then maybe 3 signs discount again for the multimedia, and 2 rocks per building that you build. That's the thing that separates them. If it's only these 3, then he has his only tier, right? If it's a culture fest, then he is the GOAT, 100%, no questions. Just Bach is a little more versatile, because in some games where the opponent, where it's a little more on that edge of military, and you are not certain if you can afford to put 4 people or even 6 people into those buildings. Yeah, and it's maybe a little more efficient with Bach. Yeah, but still, even with Shakespeare versus Teresa or Napoleon also, just the 3 signs discount and 1 times 2 rocks for that opera is already so good, plus the happy face. It's also some value there. It's already so good. And then you're already so far ahead versus the guy that tries to build military, because you really didn't pay that much also. Yeah, even in comparison to Bach. just for that one opera. And then, yeah, given the fact that he wins against this guy and this guy in a vacuum like any day, that guy's the GOAT. He could deserve, he is like the meta defining leader for me. He is the leader, that is the guy, my first look in the game goes to whether Shakespeare is in the game or not. That shapes the value of the printing press in the game more than Darwin. If both are in, then the printing press is super good. If all three of those are in, then it's like almost mandatory. And if he's not in, if like only Darwin is in, then already the printing press is just more or less situational. Yeah, there's no overstatement how much this guy shapes the two-player meta. And then look at Hollywood, that's just getting absurd then. 50 culture, 60 culture Hollywood with Shakespeare is just super easily done. You pair this with a masonry, you build all those buildings for free. Yeah. Shakespeare is the GOAT. Harvard College. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. I think most of the H2 ones are pretty good. And I wouldn't say it's S tier, but if it was only this, one culture, 3 science, then I would maybe even say it's only B tier. But it's, yeah, you can have huge science issues and then get it at a good timing, H2, and solve science for the rest of the game, more or less. But this text is super important also because it makes the game a lot easier for you and a lot more difficult for your opponent because the military potentials especially change drastically. And all of a sudden you need to play a lot more conservative against the Harvard College player. You always have to think about his possibility of that extra military build-up that he can play, or the patriotism that he can play out of nothing just because it drops. That is a huge difference, especially in two-player. So, yeah, all these things combined, I would say good A tier. Eiffel Tower, a bit underwhelming out, but still, just for culture pattern and happy face, deserves B tier. In the culture fest meta, where you get kept out by the urban building limit, most of the times, that can be on top. You just have to be careful. Not to take it too late into the game, and also building operas, if you still can build operas most of the times better than building an Eiffel Tower, obviously, if you have the people. But it has its place. It's not, it might even be C tier. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say for me, these tiers. I don't find myself building that very often because it is expensive. 13 rocks is expensive for what it does, but at some games you have abundant rocks and then it's a good rock dump. But say, I think maybe it's C tier. Let's keep it there. It's just a reminder that those tiers just don't mean like, oh, C tier is unplayable or something, right? It's just getting more situational, and maybe the value ceiling of this isn't that insane, and the value floor of this is also not that bad. So it's just solid, but never really great, I think. Yeah, honestly, for example, compared to the Taj Mahal that produces probably more culture than this, that you get earlier and it costs only 8 rocks, and you have not used civil actions for that. So maybe you can say this is almost strictly worse than that. It's hard to compare it like this, obviously, but maybe just one perspective. Kremlin. The happy face, the bad happy face hurts, but all the rest is really good. It's really good. B tier? I think I don't play it that often, but only because the bad happy face makes it really hard to play often. And there's many cases where I think, I would love to build this, but I can't. And if I can, then I'm always happy. Yeah, let's say B tier. I think this is a good B tier. Statue of Liberty. Yeah, maybe also. Maybe a bit better than Kremlin even. It's deceptively good. Two culture pattern with an H2 government and more or less a vast territory, right? It's good. It's expensive, but only 2 steps. In that sense, yeah, if you compare it with the Eiffel Tower, it's like almost strictly better. It's one rock less, 1 step less. This is better than Happy Face, and this 2 culture pattern can be 3. This is 4 culture pattern. So it's good. There's a lot of cases where I built this. You get blocked on food. Ah, okay. You have some room to breathe, some extra people you can build, you can get out with your 2 agricultures, or maybe you build a 3rd agriculture. And yeah, overall, sometimes you don't get an H2 government, or you already had an H1 government. You get the democracy. You go from 0 to 6 culture income just by putting the democracy out. Yeah, I like it, but it's not. I wouldn't go as far as saying A tier. Probably. Louvre. I would say a bit better than the Eiffel Tower. It's 1 culture more, and you get those rocks back later, and that is very relevant. Also, I talked about this military potential with Harvard, and yeah, that's just 6 rock potential you always have for a lot of. That's nice. Also, quite situational. I'm not building that very often, but yeah, 5 culture pattern, and later on those 6 rocks available. If you need some, you kind of need some blue cube source. You need a justice system or a wealthy territory, or maybe developed at least. Otherwise, you run into into corruption issues. That's the downside. But if you don't run into corruption issues, this can be decent. I would say it's a bit better than the Eiffel Tower. Ocean Air Service, D tier. Go away. Makes no sense. That makes no sense. This here. This card makes no sense. It was already in my play group considered to be super good before the buffs, and then they said, okay, it needs an extra yellow cube and it needs to be cheaper. Why? I would strongly assume this is a case where some people didn't understand how statistics work. Maybe this was underplayed or something, or it didn't have the best win rate, or I don't even know. But I don't know how they got to the conclusion that it needs a double buff. This makes no sense. This card makes no sense. Let's move on. A card that is always almost always a mandatory pick when it enters the row. Yeah, that's not well designed, right? So in 2-player, maybe I don't know. Maybe it's not as bad as in 3-4 player. I'm not certain. Sometimes it's not a mandatory pick. Sometimes you just can't take it. But more often than not, almost always, it's kind of mandatory. Yeah, meh. Railroad, that's a good wonder, and maybe even actually, yeah, not S tier probably, because you don't build coal as often as in 3-player, 4-player. I think in 4-player it's an S tier wonder, but in 2-player it's more like a solid A tier wonder. The cost pays itself at some point, even if you just continue playing iron, and then it's 5 strength per turn, 5 strength, on top of the possibility that you get a very early oil, and you have an economic progress there in the deck, and yeah, that enables that. That also wins some 2-player games still, and yeah. This 5 strength is super relevant, it is, also in 2-player. Can play more greedy thanks to it, or punish the opponent thanks to it. In a game state where in most of the times, both players are hovering above around like 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 strength. 5 extra strength is a lot. So, yeah, given with the fact it pays itself, I like to build it. Also in 2-player, I do. Suez Canal is also more or less meta defining. Or game defining. That's after Shakespeare, the card that I look. Is it in the game or not? Third one is probably Dietrich. And that can change the value of H1 leaders and HA leaders and wonders drastically. And it can just be a win condition setup. Getting this with an autonomous or just another normal, or yeah, a good H2 colony, and having 2 colonies already, sometimes even 1 is enough to justify it. And in most of the cases, you just have 2 extra rocks per turn. It's cheap to build. 11 rocks, I think that's too cheap, honestly. For what it does, just that's I would say decently balanced S tier wonder. So it's still, I think it could have 1 more rock and it would be fine, maybe. The ceiling is infinite. The floor is also low. So sometimes it's an interesting scenario for this game where you say, do I gamble it or not? That's an interesting question. Yeah. And the ceiling is infinite. Can be a win condition in itself. Yeah. Can I actually make an extra tier here? Add row above here. Yeah, that's, yeah, well, now I have to think if I put this guy here, but no. I would need to create 2 rows, I guess. Yeah, I think I'm fine with this. I think these leaders could deserve a slight nerf. Maybe of those, Darwin is the most balanced and doesn't deserve the nerf, but these do. Yeah, 1 more rock, old version, remove the yellow, and 2 rocks more, and it's decent. It's probably still here. Yeah, let me know what you think. I think this one was easier than H1. This one was easier. All right, yeah. Let me know what you think, guys. See you in the next one.